Welcome back to The Human Perspective. Today our guest is Professor Beth Haller, who is from Towson University. Her title is Professor of Journalism and New Media in the School of Fine Arts and Communication. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you.
So, Beth has been involved in media and documentation of disability in media for a number of decades now, and has been really generous with her time. So I thought she'd be a really interesting person for us to talk with today. So Beth, how did you get involved in disability and communications in media?
So I think it really grew out of the Deaf President Now movement.
What was that?
So the Deaf President Now movement in 1988 was when the deaf community, specifically at Gallaudet University in DC, was very upset that a new president had been hired and the person was not deaf. So they shut down the university for a number of days, I think 6 or 7, and so it was a big kind of switch of deaf people taking control and saying, we're not putting up with this anymore. And even though I don't think I was aware of what was going on in '88, I was a journalist out in Illinois at that time. But when I came to grad school at the University of Maryland in 1989, I think it was in the back of my head. I think there had been enough media coverage of it that people were aware that that had gone on. And so I was taking a writing class, like a feature writing class, because I had just gone back to school to kind of see if I wanted to just take my journalism career in a different direction. And so I was taking this class and I wanted to do something that would include some kind of translation, and it just popped into my head that I should profile a deaf student at Gallaudet. And so it kind of all started from there. I interviewed one of the students and kind of got interested in the deaf community, and when it was time to do my thesis, I looked at how the Washington Post and New York Times covered the deaf community before, during, and after the Deaf President Now movement, and I saw significant changes, like they suddenly learned how to use the right terminology, they suddenly learned about the issues facing the deaf community, which I thought was really powerful to show how the media could learn, and when they did learn, that you got better coverage. So I think that was a really kind of turning point where I saw that the media had a really important power to kind of change representations, and so that I thought was great.
You got the bug.
Yeah, I got the bug, and then I went looking in, like I was taking theory and research methods classes, so I started looking to see what other research was being done about people with disabilities and their representation, and especially the news media, and I found hardly anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I like a challenge. Working in an area where nobody's working, and there was one other person that kind of started working in that same area, a guy named John Clogston, who was a PhD student at Michigan State, somewhere in Michigan, who I met a couple of years later at the first SDS, Society for Disability Studies meeting that I went to. And of course, then I decided to go on for my PhD. By that point, the ADA had passed, and I ended up doing my dissertation looking at how the ADA was covered in a lot of the major news media in America.
So when you were looking at that, what did you see?
So I saw, because the disability community was so involved in writing the ADA and crafting the words that were used about disability, that, and you know, people think of journalism, I think, as like watchdogs, but some of the research shows that they're actually lapdogs, that they just, like, you know, regurgitate whatever the government gives them. And in this case, it was kind of great because the government was giving them accurate information about disability, because the disability community had been involved in crafting the ADA. So that was, you know, kind of an interesting thing to find, and also to see how the media was about to kind of learn about disability from the ADA, but then it kind of fell into this void when the disability community kind of rejected the news media and didn't really push the media to cover their organizations, and kind of who jumped in to fill that media space.
What do you mean rejected?
Well, there's this whole, I don't know if you read the Joe Shapiro article, but it was called the stealth movement to get the ADA passed, and so there was a conscious effort, and I think there was actually an article in the Disability Rag about this as well, a conscious effort by some of the key people to not promote the ADA to the news media, and in the long run, I think that ended up hurting a lot in terms of the representation, and then just public opinion. They didn't know anything. There was a Lewis Harris poll a couple of years after the ADA passed that showed that less than 20% of Americans knew what the ADA was. And I feel like that's still in effect, that a lot of people don't know about disability rights laws, and that's why in a lot of media stuff, people with disabilities are forgotten. Even people that want to be inclusive, they don't think about disability because it hasn't been covered, like the environment's been covered or the African American community's been covered, and so a lot of the people in the news media don't even think about it.
So I think this is an important question because
Sure.
when the ADA was being developed, there was concern about the fact that if there was too much known about it, that it might also cause it
I agree.
to have amendments put on it that could
Right.
weaken it. So I understand that it was kind of below the radar in many ways. But since then, as you're just saying, getting disability in the media above the radar has not really happened to the degree that either of us would like to see it
Right.
happen. And it's not just in media, but in one particular area of media, it's broadly.
Right.
So maybe if we could talk for a little bit about why you think that is. So there was the hype of the ADA, but I think some conscious decisions about not wanting to adversely affect it.
Right.
Then the law did come out. And what do you think needs to be done in order to get the media engaged, for example, in this discussion?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think there's a lot of forgotten information. I think the journalists themselves would definitely cover disability rights, and because they want to cover anything that's about, social justice in America, because that's who they are in traditional media. But when they were covering the ADA, because they didn't know where to find the voices from the disability community, the businesses and the local governments jumped into the mix. And so a lot of the ADA stories were about what those businesses and local governments didn't like about disability rights laws. And so it got reframed by the people who were against the ADA instead of by the disability community telling what the power of this law was going to be. And then I think journalists have a lot of problems with their editors and news directors, because I think, like I said, journalists are very interested in doing stories about what disability rights is about because they're good stories. When they take them back to their news director or their editor, the editors want a pity approach, or they want a feature, they want something that isn't the kind of powerful, investigative, coverage that they would give anything else, because they are in this kind of stereotype mode of, oh, that's
Do you
our...
think that's changing?
Well, I think only because traditional media has kind of collapsed, so a lot of journalists just do what they want.
So how do you think new media is affecting how the general community in the United States or other countries is learning about disability? Do you think it's as robust as it should be? What do you think we need to do to ramp this up?
Yeah, I think it has become a very robust medium for the disability rights community, and they're all over Twitter, they're all over YouTube, they're all over Facebook and other social media to really, they've kind of cut out that middleman of editors and journalists to really define the stories themselves, and I think they're getting a lot of visibility. But there's still power to be in a story in the Washington Post or the New York Times or on NBC News. So I don't think it should just stop at the social media, new media realm, that they still need to be kind of forcing their way into coverage that's in traditional old legacy media, as they call them, But I think a lot of traditional news media are looking to social media for story ideas. So they're actually are getting, to write op-eds in the Washington Post. There was a great op-ed on CNN by a deaf professor about the lack of hiring of disabled actors for a lot of the film world in the run-up to the Academy Awards this weekend. So, I think there's a lot more opportunities to participate in traditional media because of social media, because of new media, and traditional media is much more open to having all the voices directly from the community these days, and I think disabled people should be leveraging that as much as possible.
Great. So I guess it's not hard to believe anymore, since I've been saying this for more than 50 interviews, but we're finished with this interview today. You can look Beth Haller up, and we'll have some information that you can read to follow her. She does amazing work, and I think you can tell there's much to be learned, and we only covered a smattering of what she does. So thank you, have a good day, and we'll see you for the next program.
Thank you.